What we're going to talk about today is loving too much, or why being in the physical world and loving people isn't the solution. And people often talk about love being the answer, but there's a certain kind of love that is the answer, and we're going to be very clear about what that is. We're going to start, however, with a riddle, and I want to see if you can guess the riddle quickly, okay? So here's the riddle. What goes up but never comes down? Your age. Right? Goes up, never comes down. Notice how I didn't give you any time to answer, though. Is it fun if I give you a riddle and you can't answer it because I blurted out the answer? What's the square root of 121? 11. Right? Who needs a know-it-all? Right? It doesn't work. You tell someone the answer to a riddle before you give them an opportunity to figure it out. That's no fun. See, if teachers always did the test for the students, they wouldn't learn. If all we do is solve problems for people, we're not going to give them their own authentic experience, right? It's no fun, in fact, if you do it that way. Well, one of the problems with the love that we have in this world is that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to solve problems for people without them having the authentic experience of going through the authentic experience. The issue is people need to have the authentic experience, and if you try to solve problems for them, it's not going to be the authentic experience, right? In fact, the world is set up in such a way where that's impossible to happen anyways. The issue is when we try to protect people from suffering through love, because that's one way people do it. I love you so much, I'm going to take away all your pain and your sorrow. And if that's why we're loving, guess what? That's not going to work. It only creates suffering for the person that's doing the loving. Because you're trying to keep someone from suffering, and yet they must suffer. It's part of the process. That's like seeing an acorn and like wanting it to be an oak tree now. No, it's got a process to go through, and it can't avoid any step along the way. Human beings together, we're working on a process. It's a collective process. We talked about it last week with the birth of Christ, which is the birth of Christ inside of all of us, which is the real type of love that we need to be doing, and not just loving people. Loving people inevitably falls into camps, patterns where people pick sides. It's us against them, you know? You're different than me somehow, or you're better than me, or you're worse than me. That's what happens when we love what I would say the wrong way, or the lower level way. Krishna has a way of addressing that I think is elite. He talks about dark inertia, passion, and lucidity. And to be darkly inert is to not love in the flesh. To be passionate is to love in the flesh. But to be lucid is to love spiritually. There are significant differences in each of those things, and there's qualities. But most people equate love to physical love and loving human beings. That inevitably leads to suffering in many ways. I'm going to ask a question that they ask in Course in Miracles, which illustrates this really well. Would you choose to be among the saviors of the world, or stay in hell and keep your brother there? Do you want to love physically and have other people love physically and go through the inevitable suffering, or ascend to a type of love, what they say is among the saviors of the world, which is what it is when Christ is in you, which helps people actually escape from suffering? If all we do is facilitate human love, we're going to facilitate human suffering. But if we add spiritual love, agape style love, to the physical experience, the human experience, we can escape suffering. And so I ask you the question then, do you love this, the physical being, or this, the spiritual being? Good way to think of it is the physical being is ruled by the ego, and it by nature is dual. There's left and right, tall and short, fat and thin, black and white, male and female, and all the variations. That's dualistic. It's also very divisive. The physical world is ruled by the ego. The spiritual world, well, the world of souls, the inner world, is ruled by the spirit, and it's non-dual. It's very unifying. It brings people together very quickly when they're willing to work on it. When we love people physically, we're going to have issues because we're going to debate, should we do this or should we do that? But if you love someone spiritually, you're not interested in doing this or doing that. You're interested in the acceptance of things or the tolerance of things, which means we can do either. I'll go with the flow. The physical world is very conditional. I'll only love you if. And a lot of people act as if they're unconditionally loving physically, but you could always push someone to a point. Well, they're no longer going to love you if you start doing some wicked things like, you know what, you need to get away from me. That's conditional. And it makes sense. We should have that type of conditional love. In fact, all of this makes sense for the human world. It's just not spiritual to use the word love physically. It doesn't work like that because it's very conditional. It's the essence of what it says in Genesis to not eat off the tree of good and evil. Eating off the tree of good and evil is assessing the world physically and saying, well, that's good and that's bad, and you're good and you're bad. And we're assessing all things physically like that. And again, there's a role for that in the physical world, but let's just not call that the highest level of love. When we apply love to the system, it gets filtered through all of this. And to the ultimate point of what I want to be talking about is why people who love a lot suffer so much. You know, I just want people to be better, and I want people to not suffer. And I'd like to slide Mother Teresa in here. She loved people a whole lot, but she even admitted that she was very depressed by the end of her life because the physical world didn't get any better. That's because the physical world is not going to get any better. It's set up this way. It's the system or the matrix that we're in. But you know what Mother Teresa did? She touched a lot of spiritual lives. She changed people from within. And I wish she had focused on that a little bit more. God bless her for all the work that she did, right? But she did change the world inner. It's not going to change on the outer. So, there's one way of looking at love, and it's through sympathetic eyes. And that's what happens when we look at people, and we feel bad for people. Sucks to be you, I often say. It's when you look at a physical person going through physical things, and you think their circumstances are bad, and so you have sympathy for them. That immediately transmits a certain kind of energy to that person that says, my situation is bad, and I wish it were different. That's sympathy. From the spiritual, unconditional perspective, which is eating off the tree of life, the tree of unity, it's empathy. It's seeing a person is in a certain situation, feeling their pain and understanding their circumstances, but trusting it. That's a major difference between looking at someone and saying, sucks to be you, versus, hey, you're in a situation that's an opportunity for your ultimate growth spiritually. And so to pull all that together is the wonderful verse in Corinthians that defines love, and it defines it very spiritually. You'll notice it doesn't talk about physical things. It doesn't say, love puts away the dishes, although you could do that. It doesn't say, love remembers every anniversary, although that's something you could certainly do. It's very specific. I got the beginning of it here because it's a long verse. Love is patient. Well, that's clearly spiritual. And you can practice patience many ways physically. But love is patient. Love is kind. Again, can be practiced spiritually and physically. But it's going to look different ways for different people depending on the context. Okay? But it's always kind. Love does not envy. It looks at other people's process and it looks at their growth and their development, whether it's physical or spiritual, and it admires it. Love does not dishonor others. If someone disagrees with you, you don't have to shame them. Plenty of that going on in this country where people disagree with each other and it must go to Facebook and shame other people. Well, love does not do that. It does not dishonor others. Love is not self-seeking. It doesn't need to have all the attention. In fact, it doesn't care about likes on Facebook at all. It is what it is. If I get 5 likes, fine. If I get 1 million, fine. Whatever. No prophet was bragging about how spiritual they were, right? Because they just taught. That was it. Love is not easily angered. I love that word, or that phrase. Love is not easily angered. Doesn't it imply something? You can get a little angry, and there's time to get a little angry. But the only place for really getting angry is when someone's not applying spiritual practices, when someone's not applying themselves spiritually. And that's when you can get a little angry. Jesus certainly did it with his disciples, no doubt about it. But I want to emphasize in all of those definitions of love in Corinthians that love always trusts. And that's really what this lecture is about. So if you see a physical person in your life that you care about, and you see them physically, and you see their adversities, and we say, gee, that's bad, I wish that wasn't happening for you, you're not trusting something. Now, Muhammad has a teaching about this. There's 2 types of trust. He says you should trust God, but you should tie up your camel. Which is to say, you might not want to trust the physical world, okay? Your camel might wander off, or someone else might steal your camel. When we say always trust, or when the Bible says always trust, it doesn't mean always trust people. People might be lying and deceiving. But you can always trust God. You can always trust Mother Nature. You can always trust the quantum physics of things. There's a method to this madness, okay? Whatever it is you or anyone else is experiencing is happening for a reason, but it's a spiritual reason. There's not a single issue you can't put into this and recognize that there's an opportunity for growth, learning, and development for any circumstance anybody goes through. As a therapist, if I meet someone who's struggling, and 100% of the people that come into my office have come into it because they're struggling with something, not to tell me how great their life is, they're struggling with something. My initial instinct isn't, oh, that sucks. It's, oh, let's learn how this is going to be something beneficial for you. Let's see how we can develop and grow. I don't necessarily say that to them, but I certainly know that's the trajectory that they're on. An example being someone struggling with the death of a loved one. The long-term process there is to learn that death is not a thing. Death is an illusion. Death is a transition. And one day we see loved ones again. If we learn that now, we feel more peaceful. We feel more spiritual. But if we just focus on the body, we're focused on the flesh, we'll just see the death of things. But when we grow and we work with it and we practice the spiritual development, we'll see the spirit in it and we realize nothing and nobody ever actually died. All forms of adversity are this. We often take it happens for a reason in the wrong direction, like you don't get a job, and therefore that God or the universe wants you to have some other job. Well, that may or may not be the case. But for sure, not getting a job is an opportunity to practice acceptance and perhaps discipline and creativity. Go look for another job. And those are all spiritual skills. The more we face adversity like that as an opportunity for growth, the more spiritual we'll be. And so when we watch other people suffer and we love them from a physical level, we are going to have pain as a result. And there's a level for that. Krishna would call it passion. But it doesn't get them out of hell, as the Course in Miracles says. If all we're doing is trying to facilitate the physical growth of other people so everyone in the world can be rich, if that's the goal, we're not going to escape. We're going to keep coming back and back again. The key is to love another person spiritually and help them understand the spiritual skills that are going to help them in their situation. If it's trying to fix something physically, that's almost impossible to do most of the time. But there's always a spiritual solution, and that's why we can always trust. If it's infidelity in a marriage, right? If it's a neighbor stole something from you, if it's a political leader you disagree with, we always have forgiveness as an opportunity, and that's a spiritual thing. It also detaches from the ego, which is the thing that's trying to roll us physically. But when we practice a virtue, long lines of cars or bad drivers is a chance to practice patience in traffic. Always the case. Addiction and recovery is a discipline opportunity. It's always the case. And if we only look at it physically, we're going to end up suffering. We're going to end up struggling. And we're finding ourselves in the dark and inert or the passion world that Krishna talks about. But to see ourselves spiritually, to see another person as a spiritual being, is to have lucidity, which is what Krishna talks about. And that's the highest level of love. Is, listen, I know you're in pain now, but it's extremely similar to childbirth, as Jesus and Paul both teach. Oh, you're in pain now, but you'll get over it. And women keep having babies, even though it's very, very painful. Okay? Why? Because it's worth it in the long run, the way Jesus and Paul both taught it. We are together in childbirth. If women only focused on the pain, they would never do it. But they do it because they know that there's a reward at the end. If they forgot that a baby was coming, they will scream and say, this sucks, I hate it. And what obstetrician would say, you're right, that's bad, this pain is bad. They don't say that. They remind you, well, the baby's near. Okay? When someone is in emotional pain, it could be because the baby's near. The Christ that we talked about last week, that Christmas is about, could be near. The pain gets greater at the end of the pregnancy, right? It's more intense there. The childbirth is difficult. You need not feel bad for women in a maternity ward. The fact is, it's actually a joyous thing that's happening. When people are suffering, why does Paul say rejoice in our sufferings? And James say consider it a joy when we face adversity of all kinds? It's because the birth is near. And if we feel bad for people or we try to take their problems away from them, so they don't experience that, we're actually loving wrong. We're not loving from a trusting place. We're loving from a place in which we say God doesn't know what he's doing, or nature's screwed up and confused, okay? This doesn't mean you don't try to help people solve problems. Of course you do, but you do so spiritually. Because you can look at someone's spiritual being first, and then their physical being, in that order. You can live in the world of duality, but realize ultimately the unifying aspect is we're all spiritual beings, and we all have to learn this lesson, period. It's why the love passage in Corinthians says we see in a mirror dimly. We are all using each other to practice spiritual skills. Whatever suffering you see in someone else, and you say it's bad, is showing where you're at in your development. If you think the world is just this giant cesspool of suffering, then you're not noticing that it's a maternity ward for souls, right? Little Christs are being born all over the place, or at least we're developing along those lines. But once you start to see that that's what it's about, you can embrace the adversity. Do you want it to last? Of course not. Do you... Once you see it the right way, with love of spirit, with love of soul, over love of flesh, in that order, you could still love the physical beings in your life. But now you're going to understand and respect and trust the very circumstances they're going through as part of a divine plan. To do anything else is settling for less. And what we do is victimize people by saying that your circumstances are bad for you. That's no fun for anyone. One of my favorite therapeutic questions, and I've asked this maybe hundreds of times over the years. Would you like me to feel bad for you? Do you want me to feel bad for you? Should I lower the bar on you? And no one ever says, yeah, do that, please. I need your sympathy. No, they want action plans, which are inner and outer, physical for sure. But if we're not supporting people emotionally in the inner world through a sense of spirituality, we're not loving the right way. In fact, we're restricting love. So it comes down to this. We have an opportunity, like a mirror, to see each other as spiritual beings or physical beings. The more I see you spiritually, it's just a reflection of how I'm seeing myself as well. But if I just see you physically, and I see all the world's arguments as physical things, well, I'm seeing a mirror too. I'm looking at the world physically, I'm seeing myself physically. If we want to experience love on the highest level, we must always trust. We must always understand that the universe is teaching us what we need to learn, how to develop and grow, and always can trust that.